On the night of June 14, 2017, a woman on the 16th floor of a London tower block called 9999. The operator told her to stay in her flat, close the doors, put wet towels along the bottom, wait for the fire brigade. She stayed. Her neighbor, one floor below, ignored the same instruction, grabbed his children, and ran down a smoke-filled stairwell he could no longer see through. The neighbor is alive. The woman is not. That instruction, stay where you are, wait for the all clear, was born in 1940. During the Blitz, it saved hundreds of thousands of lives. 77 years later, at Grenfell Tower, it killed 72 people who were waiting for an all clear that never came, because the system around them had already failed. This is not a story about a fire. This is a story about what happens when the survival instincts of one era collide with the threat environment of another. And no one tells the people caught between them that the rules have changed. These instincts are in you, not because you chose them, because they were handed down through kitchen table warnings, through the way your grandmother flinched at a siren, through habits so deeply ordinary that no one thought to question whether they still applied. Between 1939 and 1945, the civilian populations of Europe and Asia were subjected to the most sustained campaign of aerial bombardment in human history. The British government distributed over 35 million gas masks before the first bomb fell. The air raid precaution system trained 1.4 million volunteers. The Blitz alone killed approximately 43,000 British civilians between September 1940 and May 1941. Every person who survived carried behavioral lessons burned in by repetition and proximity to death. And those lessons, tested against specific bombs, specific buildings, specific poisons, a specific information landscape, became reflex. Then they became family culture. Then they became yours. The problem is that the bombs changed, the buildings changed, the poisons changed, and the reflexes did not. Consider the most basic one. You are caught outside when something explodes. Your body wants to run toward the nearest solid building. Get inside. Get behind a wall. In 1940, this was correct. High explosive bombs delivered blast waves and shrapnel laterally. A load-bearing brick wall, and nearly every British building was load-bearing masonry, could absorb fragmentation that would kill you in the open. If the bomb struck nearby, the walls often held. The instinct was rational because the physics of threat and the physics of shelter matched. Now place that same instinct in a modern earthquake. You are on a street lined with glass curtain office towers, the kind that define every major city built or rebuilt since 1970. The ground shakes. Your body says, get inside something solid. But these buildings are not solid in the way your grandfather's terrace house was solid. The facade is glass, tempered, laminated, hung on aluminum mullions, and in a seismic event, those panels shed like scales. They become projectiles. The 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake killed 63 people, and a disproportionate number died under unreinforced masonry that collapsed outward onto the streets. FEMA's current guidance is explicit. Drop, cover, hold on. Do not run toward or into buildings. The instinct that saved your grandfather from a Luftwaffe bomb is the instinct that puts you under a falling wall in San Francisco. Go deeper. Go underground. During the Blitz, the London Underground sheltered up to 177,000 people on a single night. Anderson shelters, corrugated steel arches half buried in back gardens, protected roughly 2.25 million. Going underground was the single most effective thing a civilian could do, because bombs detonated at or above ground level, and blast energy dissipated through soil. Down was safe. Down was where you lived through the night. Now imagine a chemical release in a modern city. Sarin, chlorine. Most weaponizable toxic industrial chemicals are heavier than air. They do not rise. They sink. They pool in low-lying areas, basements, underground stations, subway tunnels. In 1995, members of Aum Shinrikyo released sarin in the Tokyo subway and killed 13 people, injuring thousands, precisely because the agent concentrated in the enclosed underground space. The correct modern response to a chemical release is to move upward and upwind, precisely the opposite of blitz instinct. The basement that saved your grandmother from bombs would fill with poison gas today, and the reflex that sent her underground would send you into the highest concentration. You carry these patterns. You may not know it, but the next time a siren sounds, some part of you, the part that was trained before you were born, will want to go low, go dark, go still. That brings us to the blackout. From September 1st, 1939, Britain enforced total darkness after sunset. No visible light from any building, any vehicle, any match struck on a street corner. The logic was sound. Luftwaffe Pathfinder aircraft navigated visually, and city lights were targeting references. Making yourself invisible was survival. An entire population learned to sit in the dark, perfectly still, and wait. An anonymous ARP warden, quoted in a 1942 government publication, put it plainly: "You get used to it. The ones who don't get used to it are the ones who try to think about it. The trick is not to think. Just move where you've been told to move. Do not think. Do as you are told. Wait in the dark." Now, place that instinct inside a modern active shooter scenario. The Department of Homeland Security's guidance, adopted in 2012, shares the hide component, but it diverges in every way that matters. Blitz hiding was passive. You sat still and waited for authority to sound the all clear. Modern active shooter survival requires barricading the door, silencing your phone, mapping an escape route, and being prepared to run or fight. Passive hiding in a dark room without these measures correlates with higher casualty rates. The Blitz trained people to be still, silent, and obedient. Modern threats increasingly punish stillness, and that obedience was reinforced by a single voice: the BBC. During the war, it operated as the primary civilian information channel, censored by the Ministry of Information but deliberately kept credible. Churchill's war cabinet understood that if the BBC lied about Dunkirk, no one would believe it about the next air raid. So the BBC told hard truths, and in return, the nation obeyed. By 1941, mass observation surveys documented that over 80% of British adults relied exclusively on BBC radio for news and official guidance. Nella Last, a housewife in Barrow-in-Furness who kept a diary throughout the war, wrote about packing a bag every night. Insurance papers, birth certificates, her mother's ring in a velvet pouch. "It's become as natural as brushing my teeth," she wrote. She did not question whether to pack it. She did not question what the radio told her. Preparation and obedience fused into a single nightly ritual. This produced a generation that trusted the official broadcast and did not seek alternatives. In a world with one authoritative voice, that trust was rational. In a world where official channels can be spoofed, delayed, or simply wrong, where the Japanese government's communications during the 2011 Fukushima disaster lagged behind the actual radiation zone by critical hours, that same trust reflex becomes a vulnerability. The instinct to wait for authoritative instruction can freeze you during a rapidly evolving event where self-evacuation is the correct response. If your family taught you to listen to the authorities and do what they say, that lesson has a birth date. It was 1940, and the information environment it was designed for no longer exists. Here is where the instincts start to compound. Your grandparents were trained not only to obey, but to suppress. The ethos that would later be stamped on a poster, "Keep calm and carry on," was genuinely central to British civilian morale. The famous poster itself was printed in 2.5 million copies, but never officially distributed. It was reserved for a scenario that never came, a German invasion of Britain. But the ethos was everywhere. Stoicism, routine, go to work, queue for rations. Do not display fear. And it worked. Psychological studies of Blitz survivors showed that those who maintained routine, going to the shop, keeping the house, holding to the schedule, showed lower rates of acute breakdown. Routine provided cognitive structure that prevented panic from spiraling. But a psychiatrist named Felix Brown, writing in The Lancet in 1941, documented the shadow side. Patients who followed instructions rigidly, who suppressed fear and kept to routine, showed lower acute anxiety but higher delayed breakdown. They had not processed the fear. They had postponed it. What Brown described is what we would now call a PTSD vulnerability pattern. Keep calm and carry on was a survival strategy. It was also an emotional debt that the next generation paid without ever being told what they owed. Have you noticed it in your own family? The grandfather who would not talk about the war. The grandmother who changed the subject when the conversation turned to feelings. The parent who told you to stop crying, to toughen up, to just get on with it. These are not personality traits. They are survival adaptations transmitted as parenting, behaviors that kept people functional under bombs, passed to children who were not under bombs but were raised as though they might be. Consider the physical instincts too. Fire watching. From 1941, British men aged 16 to 60 were legally required to serve as fire watchers on rooftops. The doctrine was explicit. When an incendiary bomb lands, you have 2 to 3 minutes to extinguish it with sand or a stirrup pump before it ignites the structure. Citizens were trained to approach fire, engage it, fight it with hand tools. Picture that watcher on a London rooftop. Tin helmet, stirrup pump beside him, bucket of sand, scanning the dark for the white flash of a magnesium incendiary falling through the blackout. No flashlight, starlight, and distant fires only. That courage was rational because a 1940s house burned slowly. Wood, wool, cotton, natural materials with relatively survivable smoke. A room fire might take 20 minutes to become unsurvivable. A modern room filled with synthetic fabrics, polyurethane foam, plastic fixtures can reach flashover in under 4 minutes. The smoke does not just choke, it poisons. Hydrogen cyanide, carbon monoxide at lethal concentrations. Research from the National Institute of Standards and Technology documents this. A modern furnished room can produce fatal toxic conditions faster than the heat itself can kill you. The fire watcher instinct, approach, assess, engage, applied to a modern house fire is not bravery. It is a fatality pathway. Your great-grandfather was trained to run toward fire with a bucket. A modern house fire produces hydrogen cyanide that kills before you feel the heat. Even the small rituals persist. In 1940, British civilians were told to tape their windows, diagonal crosses of brown paper or fabric tape, to prevent glass shards from becoming projectiles during a bomb blast. For the thin, annealed glass of the period, this made sense. The tape held shattered glass together, reducing the razor-like fragmentation that caused horrific facial and eye injuries. Modern glazing is different. Tempered glass is engineered to crumble into small, blunt pieces. Laminated glass holds itself together with an internal polymer layer. Taping modern tempered glass provides no benefit and can actually create a larger, unified projectile instead of allowing the designed fragmentation pattern. Yet, window taping resurfaced across American neighborhoods after September 11, 2001. People who had never experienced a bomb, whose grandparents had experienced thousands, stood in kitchens applying masking tape to windows without knowing they were performing a ritual from 1940, a behavioral ghost operating on a building material that no longer existed. The instinct to move in groups has a similar inheritance. Operation Pied Piper evacuated 3.5 million people in the first 4 days of September 1939. School classes together, neighborhood groups together, directed by wardens to specific trains. Individual movement was discouraged. In crisis, you gathered. You moved as a mass. You waited for collective instruction. Modern evacuation science tells a different story. Research published in Nature on crowd dynamics demonstrates that herd behavior in dense crowds creates bottlenecks, crushes, and catastrophic casualty counts at choke points. The 2022 Itaewon crowd crush in Seoul killed 159 people. In high-density crowd scenarios, individual deviation, moving laterally, seeking alternative exits, breaking from the flow, is the survival behavior. The wartime instinct to stay with the group becomes, at scale, the mechanism of the crush. And beneath all of these physical instincts lies the deepest one. Rationing began in Britain on January 8, 1940. It did not end until July 4, 1954. 15 years. An entire generation learned to stockpile small quantities, to never waste food, to treat abundance as a trick that would be taken away. Nella Last's diary is full of it. The careful arithmetic of butter and sugar, the guilt of a full plate. That mentality transmitted. The overstocked pantry, the anxiety about an uneaten meal, the reflex during the early weeks of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 to strip supermarket shelves of toilet paper and canned goods. Research published in the Canadian Journal of Agricultural Economics documented that individual hoarding during a supply chain disruption is itself the mechanism that creates shortages. The rational modern response is continued normal purchasing with a modest buffer. The wartime reflex is the opposite. Grab everything, trust nothing, assume the shelves will be empty tomorrow. The instinct that kept families fed during U-boat blockades became, 80 years later, the behavior that emptied stores for everyone. If someone in your family keeps a cabinet full of canned goods that never gets eaten, that cabinet has a history. It was stocked by a hand that remembered hunger, and it was passed forward as common sense by people who had forgotten the specific hunger it came from. So what do you do with instincts you inherited but did not choose? The first thing is to name them, not as flaws, not as weaknesses, as adaptations to a world that no longer exists, carried forward by people who loved you enough to teach you what had kept them alive. Your grandmother was not wrong to go underground. Your grandfather was not wrong to run toward the building. The ARP warden was not wrong to say the trick is not to think, just move where you've been told. They were right. For their war, for their bombs, for their buildings, their glass, their air, their radio, their chain of command. The danger is not that they taught you. The danger is that no one updated the lesson. Dr. Brown, the psychiatrist writing in The Lancet in 1941, documented something that should unsettle you. The people who followed instructions most rigidly, who kept calm, who carried on, who did not think, who moved where they were told, showed lower acute anxiety in the short term, but higher rates of delayed psychological breakdown. They had not avoided the fear, they had stored it, and the storage became its own inheritance, passed to children as emotional restraint, passed to grandchildren as the inability to name what they feel, passed forward and forward until someone sits in a therapist's office in 2025 and cannot explain why they feel that something terrible is about to happen, and that the correct response is to sit very still and wait for someone to tell them what to do. The survival instincts of the Second World War saved millions of lives. They were forged under real fire, tested against real blast physics, validated by the fact that the people who followed them lived to have children. That is not a small thing. That is the reason you exist. But the fire changed. The glass changed. The buildings, the chemicals, the crowds, the information, all of it changed. And the instincts did not, because instincts do not update themselves. They wait in the body like a packed bag by the door. Insurance papers, birth certificates, a ring in a velvet pouch, ready for an air raid that ended 80 years ago. The next time something goes wrong around you, a tremor, a siren, a crowd pressing in, a smell you cannot identify, notice what your body wants to do before your mind catches up. Go low. Go still. Go dark. Trust the voice on the radio. Stay where you are until someone says it is safe to move. That is your grandmother talking. She kept you alive once. But the war she survived is not the emergency you are standing in. And the most dangerous thing you can do is follow instructions written for a world that no longer exists, given by people who can no longer update them, in a voice so familiar you mistake it for your own judgment. If someone in your family carried these patterns, the hoarding, the silence, the obedience, the reflex to go underground, tell us in the comments who they were and what you recognize. These stories are not abstract history. They are the habits you grew up inside. Nella last packed her bag every night for 5 years. Insurance papers, birth certificates, her mother's ring. She did it until it was as natural as breathing, and by then she could no longer remember the version of herself that had not done it. That is how survival instincts work. They do not announce themselves. They become you. The question is whether you carry them forward as wisdom or as reflex, whether you know why you reach for the canned goods, why you hesitate to leave a building, why some part of you believes that if you just stay quiet and follow the instructions, someone in authority will eventually tell you that it is safe to come out. Someone did tell your grandparents that. The all clear sounded, and they emerged into the gray morning, and they were alive. The all clear is not coming for you. Not because the world is more dangerous, because the siren system, the single voice, the architecture of centralized safety, that world ended. You live in a world where the correct response depends on what is actually happening, not on what happened last time. And the only person who can update the instinct is the person carrying it. That person is you. If this made you rethink something you were taught without questioning, subscribe. The next video examines another set of certainties the 20th century handed you, and whether they still hold.